Hello viewers, welcome back to our YouTube channel. We have a guest today, that is teacher Willy Osare, and today we'll be looking at Leo Tolstoy's God Sees the Truth But Waits from the Anthology, A Silent Song and Other Stories. Before we begin, I would want to request Mr. Osare Willy to greet us.
Indeed, hello viewers, I'm Osare Willy, as you have said. A silent song. We wonder why. A silent song. At the lakeside, by the waves, we want to analyze, critically look at the issues raised in this book, and then do a summary to capture what Leo Tolstoy talks about. Also an reflection in what he does in other books, like in other writings, other stories that he has written in other books. Thank you.
One of the novels by Leo Tolstoy that I have come to love and that is quite amazing is Anna Karenina. When you look at Anna Karenina, what cuts across between Anna Karenina and the short story God Sees the Truth But Waits is the idea of forgiveness, and Leo Tolstoy makes a reference to Romans 12 verse 19, paraphrased as if you want to win over evil, then do good.
In addition, he asks, how much land does man need? Story of Pahom. Man who walks all day, runs just to get some land. But at the end, he only needs 6x4 where he's buried. Now, let's look at a reflection of what happens in God Sees But Waits. Welcome, viewers. Let me check it.
God Sees the Truth But Waits is an amazing story about a man called Aksionov. Aksionov is from a town called Vladimir, and he is a merchant. He has 2 shops and a house of his own, and this really puts him among the middle class. He is well-to-do. Apart from that, he's handsome, he's a fair-haired, he's curly-headed fella, he's married, and in the former days he used to drink, but currently he left alone drinking and being riotous after getting married.
That's very true. Now, one day the wife has a dream that he would come back after he takes off his hat, and she realizes that he has gray hair. Let's find out what happens.
Yeah, he is to attend the Nizhny fair, and in attending the Nizhny fair, he spends at an inn, accompanied by his fellow merchant. They have tea together, then they go to bed in adjoining rooms. Upon going to bed, as we know, Aksionov is an early riser. Very early in the morning, he leaves and he's going on with his journey. Then, after moving around 25 miles, he spends, or he takes time to rest at another inn.
And then, what happens? The policemen catch up with him, and they begin questioning him about what happens. He wonders why they are questioning him. He tells them actually he's a merchant and he has his own money. He has not stolen anything, and wonders why they are still questioning him. It emerges that a friend of his, a fellow merchant, has been killed. His throat has been slit. What happens?
Then they decide to search his bag, and to his surprise and shock in equal measure, they find a blood-stained knife in his bag, and then they get to conclude that he must have been the person responsible for the murder of the merchant. Yeah.
To make things worse, the officers bind his legs and arms and throw him into the cart, and is taken to the nearest prison in the town. What happens to Aksionov when he goes to prison?
Yeah, in the prison, you know, his wife tries to send petitions to the Caesar, and in this society, the Caesar is an equivalent of an emperor or a ruler.
True.
To no avail. All these petitions are overruled. then Aksionov, when the wife comes to visit, is disillusioned even more when the wife seems to suspect that he could have been responsible for the murder. Yeah. What then happens next?
Now, as you know, in prison, every now and then new prisoners are brought in. And at one time, new prisoners were brought into the prison.
Yeah.
And older prisoners would go to them to hear what's happening, what town they came from, and what charges they were brought in to that particular prison. And as people were gathered around the new prisoners, Aksionov decided to at least listen to what the prisoners were saying.
Yeah.
And behold, there's one young man who comes from the same village as Aksionov.
And all these happen, what teacher Willy has said, all this happens in a place called Siberia.
True.
So in Siberia, we see Aksionov is condemned, he is flogged, and then is taken to the mines in Siberia. And that is where a man by the name Marko Semyonik arrives. And he says that he comes from Vladimir, the town where Aksionov also came from. From his statements, there seems to be something that attracts Aksionov to the fact that he could have been the person responsible for the murder. How do we get to know? How does Aksionov get to know that it could be Marko Semyonik who was responsible for murdering the merchant?
That is the question that we reflect on in a moment.
Yes. So, Marko Semyonik, Marko Semyonik is surprised to see Aksionov, to show that they must have met somewhere. Yes. And he tells the other inmates that, it is wonderful that we meet here, lads. So that shows that they must have met somewhere.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
What a wonderful occurrence.
What a wonderful occurrence. And then later on, we see Aksionov finds Marko Semyonik trying to dig a tunnel, which he would later want to use for escape. Yes. He warns Aksionov that, lad, if you tell the policemen, then they will flog the hell out of me. And if they do that, know that I will also kill you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And now, when that happens, even the governor himself comes to question people. But of observance is that the governor knows our man Semyonik is a trustworthy man. He's trusted by other inmates. In fact, when they have issues in the cell, they normally come to him to help them solve some of these things. So what happens? The governor questions him. But in the long run, to cut the long story short, he does not reveal who dug up the soil in the cell. What happens next?
Broken by this incredible gesture shown by Aksionov, because really Aksionov has suffered on his behalf for all these 26 years. Marko Semyonik is broken, and he finally gets to confess to Aksionov that he was the one responsible for killing and the murder of the merchant. What happens next?
Oh, very sad.
Yeah.
After he has confessed.
Yes.
Now all things break loose.
Yeah.
He even says that later on he would go and tell the prison warders that is the one who killed the merchant, so that our man can be let free. But that does not happen. What happens?
The longing for Aksionov to go home back to his children and wife disappears. His heart finally becomes light. It becomes light because finally the truth has triumphed over the falsehood. The justice has been reached. And later on, when the order of release comes, we find that Aksionov had died in his sleep. He dies knowing very well that justice has been served in his platter.
Very true.
And that is the end of the story. That is the end of the plot. I would now want my friend here, Osare Willy, to take us through some of the glaring themes in this story.
Thank you, Teacher Ezra. Now, one of the first glaring theme is justice.
Yes.
But when looking at justice, we don't look at it simply in the narrow-minded form.
Yes.
We look at the justice application, the justice miscarriage, and the trial towards justice. For one, the policemen think that Semyonix is guilty because they find a bloodied knife in his bag and wonder, how could it get into his bag? How could the knife get to his bag without the thief having woken him up? So there is justice depends on evidence, and the evidence they have is a knife. So in this particular book, evidences of lack of justice are also evident because it is revealed that all these 26 years, Semyonix served for nothing. He has been unjustly treated by the society and by those who know him. What happens next? What other theme do you find there?
Yeah, we find the theme of suffering. And it is quite incredible how Aksionov goes through the suffering. We see someone who is merry, someone who is fond of singing, someone who is full of life, and now at the point that is apprehended by the police officers, we see his voice broken, his face pale. He trembles with fear as though he were guilty. And he was shocked. So in showing his shock, that was translated or interpreted as guilt on the part of the police. We see a sorry figure of Aksionov every time when his wife comes and his wife asks him, Vanya, dearest, is it true that you did it? We see Aksionov crossing himself and weeping. We see Aksionov being downcast, and most of the time is hiding his face in his hands as he begins to weep. Then we also see Aksionov lacking sleep after realizing that it is Marcus Semyonix who was responsible for, for his injustice and his serving in Siberia. So we see a suffering Aksionov. But it is quite interesting to see how Aksionov finds purpose, how he exudes a positive energy amidst the suffering of isolation or the suffering in Siberia. Mr. Willy Osare Willy, can you take us through some of the positive things that Aksionov shows in trying to deal with his isolation?
Now, when he's isolated,
Yes.
Aksionov actually takes to religion.
Yes.
He now believes in God, answering to God or asking for forgiveness from God and not humanity, which means his perspective has now changed. He gets out from the perspective where we believe human beings can draw us and bring us justice. And now he believes that it is only God, who knows the truth actually, can bring justice to himself. Now, before we go to the styles,
Yes.
what other theme can you think of in this particular book? Teacher Ezra.
Oh, yes. Maybe we can come back to that later. And as we come back to that, let me just add something on the positives that Aksionov seems to draw his strength from during this trying time in prison.
Yes.
We see him learn to make boots. He earns a little money and he uses this money to buy a book, Living of the Saints. So it is wonderful. And by the way, even if you get to listen to those who have been in isolation, people like Ngugi wa Thiong'o, you realize that they turned to literature in trying to, lessen the depression that they had. And that is the same thing that we see in Aksionov. In turning to religion, just as Osare Willy said, we see him buy a book, Living of the Saints, which will act as his companion, and he only reads this book when there is enough light
In the prison
prison.
Yes.
On Sundays, he also uses his prowess in singing, and he reads lessons and sings in the choir.
Exactly.
We will be completing our discussion on Leo Tolstoy's God Sees the Truth But Waits from the anthology A Silent Song and Other Stories. So I'll welcome our one and only guest, Mr. Osare Willy, to take us through the predominant style that has been used in that story. Thank you, Osare Willy.
All right, now the predominant style is dialogue. This dialogue helps us bring a lot of the cathartic effect in this particular story. Using the omniscient narrator, Leo Tolstoy looks at the third eye view of what happens in this story. And when the first dialogue is introduced, when the second dialogue is introduced, we see our friend Aksinov unable to respond. The policeman asks him, "How is it there is blood on this knife?" And then through the third eye, Tolstoy says, Aksinov tried to answer, but could hardly utter a word and only stammered, "I don't know, not mine." Now, this particular dialogue brings a cathartic effect. It relieves the emotion of all the bad things that have happened to Aksinov. It makes the reader relate to what's happening in this particular story. It brings out the character trait of Aksinov. It shows us that he's indeed very emotional because of what happened to his friend, the merchant. This was a friend of his, and after the death of the friend, he feels sad because his friend has left him and he does not know what the policemen are going to do to him. Now, look at the next dialogue. Now, in this dialogue, Aksinov and his wife are communicating. And the wife tells him about the dream where his head had turned grey. Our background is quite sketchy because it's a natural setup. But all these dialogues, they intend to bring out the cathartic effect. They also change the narration. They break the monotony of the narration. From the beginning, from the third person eye, the omniscient narrator, we have seen what happens. But in the dialogue, now it breaks the monotony of narration. That brings a cathartic effect to the reader of this particular book. And again, some of the character traits of Aksinov come out clearly from these particular dialogues. For example, we see how suspicious the wife of Aksinov is about his character. She wants to know who really killed the dead merchant.